Now to culture wars, which this time could lead to a real war. I need to make a point here about the weakness of the West, its lack of confidence, etc., green policies. I would bet that 4 out of 5 Australians would have no idea what country that is on this map. No idea. And even less idea then why we should send $1 or a soldier to defend it. Well, that country is Ukraine. It used to be run by the Soviet Union until it collapsed 30 years ago. But 7 years ago, just 7, Russia under Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and stole the Crimea down at Ukraine's south, and then helped rebels take over the far east of the country. And now more than 100,000 Russian soldiers surrounded Ukraine, preparing apparently to cut it off from Europe or to grab another big slice of it. Ukraine, not surprisingly after all that, wants to join NATO so that the Europeans and the US will be obliged to help defend it as a member, and maybe station troops there, rockets, whatever. But Germany is so dependent on Russian gas now that it's decommissioned its coal-fired power stations, wants to get rid of nuclear, so green, that it's not making a big fuss. On the other hand, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has overnight flown to Ukraine to stand shoulder to shoulder with its president.
More than 100,000 Russian troops are gathering on your border in perhaps the biggest demonstration of hostility towards Ukraine in our lifetimes. A further Russian invasion of Ukraine would be a political disaster, a humanitarian disaster. In my view, it would also be, for Russia, for the world, a military disaster as well.
Still, you're probably right. I mean, let the Europeans sort that out with Vladimir Putin, who doesn't want NATO weapons and soldiers right up on the border of Russia. But there is this. When the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving just Russia there, Ukraine was left with many of the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons. So there was panic. I mean, Britain and the US, Russia too, said, hey, we can't let this new country now have nuclear weapons as well. So they made a deal in 1994. Give those weapons, those nuclear weapons, back to Russia, and we promise, all of us, we promise to respect your sovereignty, your borders, and promise never to attack you. Stupidly, Ukraine believed them, gave back the nukes. Sure enough, Russia invaded 7 years ago, took the Crimea, blah, blah, and the West didn't stop it. It betrayed Ukraine. So what do you think North Korea would say, or Iran, or anyone else, if we said to them, hey, listen, stop your nuclear programs, give up your weapons, we will protect you? What, like we're protecting Ukraine? That's why it matters. Joining me on Culture Wars is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australian, host of Outsiders on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. Fantastic show. Rowan, let's not go into the ins and outs of the foreign affairs stuff here, but the overall picture here is that the West is getting weaker and weaker thanks to global warming policies, among many other things. And bully boy states like Russia and China are getting much stronger. But it seems to me that most people in the West are blind to this because they're too busy tearing down their own cultures, from its statues, to its religion, to its tradition, to its heavy industry.
You're 100% correct, Andrew. And I mean, democracies, when their cultures are weak but have strong leadership or strong political leadership, are pretty safe. And democracies, when they have, a weak leader but a strong cultural base, are pretty safe. But we now have a horrendous situation, which, by the way, many of us warned about. This is no surprise. That we are now in a situation with weak global political leadership under Joe Biden and the Democrats. And weak culture. Now, that is a deadly combination, which the communists, being the Russians and the Chinese, have been waiting for this moment, really, since the beginning of the Cold War, to see if the West, if our democratic processes would lead to a situation where we had weak political leadership, weak militaries, and a weak culture, because that is what they are relying on for the dominoes to fall. We now have that trifecta. If you look, for example, last year, Andrew, I think we spoke about it on this show, there was the irony of the American US military TV campaign, which was done like a little Bambi cartoon with a little girl, I think it was, who grew up to join the army, and she was thrilled because there were gay people in the army, and there was LGBT, and it was diverse, and it was inclusive, etc., etc. Amusing enough, perhaps, but at the same time, the Russians ran their own ad showing the Russian military, and it could have come straight out of a Rambo sort of movie. So
exactly.
The communists have been sitting there waiting for this sort of moment. They're waiting for the dominoes to fall. They've tested with Hong Kong. Boop, down went the first domino very easily without the West lifting a finger. We've seen in Afghanistan what weak leadership has done under Joe Biden. We're looking at a humanitarian disaster on an epic scale, 23 million people facing starvation, all thanks to Joe Biden and the Democrats. You vote for weak leaders, you get weak leadership. And at the same time,
that's
you indulge in weak culture.
You don't think China's noticed?
Yeah,
you don't think China's noticed and talks often about America running out of Afghanistan?